Okay, hello everyone and welcome. My name is Meg Saritsky and I am the Vice President of Member Communications at the GTFF, and I'll be your moderator for this press conference. So first I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. The University of Oregon is situated on Kalapuya Ilahi, the traditional homelands and political territories of the Kalapuya people, the first peoples of the Willamette Valley, whose descendants are now citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. Thank you to our panelists so much for taking time out of your day to come and speak with us about the critical situation at the University of Oregon surrounding COVID-19. For our viewers, our panelists will be framing their contributions and concerns about the recent spike in cases of COVID-19, less around individualized student responsibility and more towards a structural accountability mechanism for the administration in order to take an immediate action to stop and slow the spread of COVID-19. This press conference will begin with statements by our groups and panelists, followed by a panelist discussion, and then we'll take questions from the press. So we'll begin with Liz Fairchild, who is speaking on behalf of the GTFF.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here. I'm Liz Fairchild. This year I'm the Vice President of External Relations for the GTFF, and I am also a PhD student here at the U of O. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Graduate Teaching Fellow Federation's COVID response team, who were responsible for crafting this statement and the messaging I'm about to share with you. So since the onset of the pandemic, which for us bisected our spring term of 2020, the University of Oregon administration has failed to adequately meet the needs of not just graduate student employees, but also faculty and staff in regards to COVID-19 safety. This trend continued throughout the summer and now into fall term, where their policies and practices disproportionately affect research graduate students, employees, and faculty and staff. These policies, however, are not isolated to COVID-19 issues, but also reflect larger systemic problems within the university, most specifically in terms of campus policing policies and the corporate interests of the Board of Trustees. So these issues will be addressed by other groups in this press conference, and we hope to have an open dialogue together as well. So the COVID Response Committee has been attempting to have good faith engagements with UO administration through the Employee Safety Reopening Committee, but these have clearly not been sufficient to address our concerns. The COVID Response Committee has also been communicating with GTFF members about their COVID-related concerns and have provided feedback to the Board of Trustees on the health and safety operational plan, but these issues have also gone unaddressed. As the pandemic goes on, and indeed as cases continue to rise in our community, the committee will continue to bolster the voices of our members and address their needs at this time. The University of Oregon administration has just made its decision about campus reopening for winter term and has opted to primarily stay remote for instruction, so similar to this term. We really appreciate that UO made this announcement with sufficient time for faculty, staff, and students to plan for the winter term. However, despite largely remote instruction in both fall and winter, we still have some major concerns about employee health and safety. In the University of Oregon's Health and Safety Operational Plan, the university argues that safety is the responsibility of all UO employees and students. We agree that in a pandemic, safety is the responsibilities of employees and students. However, this is a shared responsibility with the University of Oregon and especially the Board of Trustees. Further, we as employees cannot do our due diligence if the university doesn't put us in a position where we are empowered to take that responsibility. To illustrate this, we'd like to use this time to provide specific examples of individual responsibilities expected of us that cannot be sufficiently addressed without changes in the policies made by the university administration. So we see problems in the following areas. First, the current policy does not provide guidance to employees who test positive beyond suggesting they should tell their supervisor. Without a robust policy for contact tracing for employees, it is impossible for us to know if we have been exposed. And if we don't know we've been exposed, we don't know to quarantine, putting countless others at risk. Furthermore, there are limited resources to support employees in isolation or quarantine, and those which are available are not communicated in a manner that is easily accessible to employees. As graduate employees, we can access testing at the UO Health Center because of our dual status as employees and students. However, other employees on campus do not have access to this kind of convenient testing. This is especially important given the current rate of transmission in Lane County and that the County Health Department reports at least 16% of positive cases have been asymptomatic. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention recommend asymptomatic testing for persons who are not known to have been exposed to still be made available by employers for communities with moderate to substantial transmission. And the Oregon Health Authority, the body which UO claims to be consulting with in its policies, requires that universities implement testing for symptomatic staff and faculty. So we've already seen this implemented in other universities such as MIT and the University of Illinois. They have testing on campus for students, staff, and faculty. So there are existing models that UO should use for their own testing policies. COVID-19 testing can also be difficult to navigate in Eugene, but the UO has the opportunity to centralize this process and be a relief to the community through implementing stronger testing policies on campus. The Health and Safety Operational Plan also states that only 16% of buildings on campus have insufficient airflow, but suggests that individuals can open windows. So as winter approaches, how will employees continue to work in these cold and damp buildings? And I'm sure we can all see that this is not an acceptable threshold, and it indicates that employees working in other buildings are somehow more disposable. Off campus, the University of Oregon's expectation is that all employees will shoulder the full responsibility of providing a remote working environment. And this transition from on campus to remote work has meant changes in infrastructure, as many of us can no longer access a reliable, workable office space. So the ramifications of this material are both material and immaterial, as we see GEs who now have to choose between paying their internet bill instead of utilities, or for immaterial, they are, blending their personal and professional life and the expectation that we now have to be available far beyond our typically understood working hours. So as a final example, the University of Oregon has refused to provide funding extensions for graduate students. And this means that many GEs must choose between either working in unsafe conditions to meet graduation requirements or find a way to pay astronomical academic costs ourselves in the middle of a global pandemic, or worse, forfeit our degrees. Presently, some lab GEs have resorted to working overnight in order to meet graduation requirements in order to avoid unmasked people in buildings. As the pandemic goes on and much of our research continues to be untenable in these circumstances, more and more GEs will be put into these physically, financially, and academically precarious situations because of the university's lack of action. In all of these cases, the University of Oregon can take steps to make it possible for individuals to take responsibility, not just for their own safety, but for the safety of those around them. Other universities have already taken these steps and can serve as a model for the University of Oregon to follow. The GTFF demands that the University of Oregon take steps to address these issues, and we will continue to work with the university to bolster working conditions and change academic policies that are unfair in a time of global upheaval. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. We'll now hear from Nick Keogh speaking on behalf of Reclaim UO.
Hi there, everyone. It's so good to be here today and have these really important conversations with you. My name is Nick, and my pronouns are he or they, and I'm an organizer with Reclaim UO. Reclaim UO is a coalition and collective of students, faculty, staff, and community members working to reverse the privatization of public higher education, with our biggest goal being the eventual and inevitable democratization of the Board of Trustees. While Reclaim UO was initially started by students in response to the UO Board of Trustees' unanimous decision in the fall of 2019 to grant President Schill a $100,000 bonus on top of his already excessive salary, Reclaim UO was also started to address the years of ongoing community and campus stakeholder frustrations with the decisions of the UO Board of Trustees and the university administration. Decisions, for example, like continual tuition increases that price students out, the continual pushback on fair contracts for GEs and faculty, the continual refusal to divest from fossil fuels and prison labor, the continual refusal to disarm and dismantle the UOPD, and most recently, the university's poor and greedy decision-making in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Currently, the appointment process of board members is extremely inaccessible and highly flawed. Because of this, we now have a board full of board members from extremely wealthy corporate backgrounds. For example, we have board members with ties to Goldman Sachs, Columbia Sportswear, Microsoft, the timber industry, and other large corporations. Not only do these board members not represent the true needs of the campus community and students, but some do not even live in the state of Oregon. This is unacceptable and must be fixed. So what does a democratized board of trustees look like? Well, a democratized board of trustees looks like a board that consists of students, faculty, staff, and community members that have voting power and representation. With a democratized board structure, we can ensure that the people making the most important decisions at UO are close to campus, close to the issues, and well informed of the impacts these decisions have on all stakeholder groups respectively. And that's what Reclaim is really fighting for. So that was just like a quick little overview. But if you have any questions or anything, definitely be sure to follow up with me and follow Reclaim UO on Instagram at Reclaim UO. And yeah, it's really great to be here, and I look forward to the conversation that will ensue. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Nick. We're now going to hear from Rhiannon Lindgren, who will be reading statements on behalf of COVID.campus and Disarm UOPD.
Hi, my name is Rhiannon. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Vice President of Organizing for the Graduate Teaching Fellows Federation. And we have some statements from anonymous student groups / one of them is just an Instagram page, but they've been doing a lot of really cool stuff on Instagram. So we wanted them to contribute to our conversation here about COVID and campus. I mean, they're literally called COVID.campus, so it's pretty relevant. So I'm going to read something that they wrote for us, and then I will take a break, and then I will read what Disarm UOPD wrote for us. Okay. And I'm not representing these organizations in any formal capacity because they are anonymous and would like to remain as such. Okay. Since the start of fall term at UO, new coronavirus cases have exploded to a record high of 140 last week, making up nearly 65% of the 217 new cases in Lane County. Rather than taking responsibility, the University of Oregon has blamed off-campus students that it, quote, didn't invite back and has no control over. The reality is that UO reopened with a wholly inadequate plan which prioritized finances over safety. Their reopening plan, released in late August, states that they will, quote, not test to a full capacity if it results in better metrics as defined by a certain number of cases out of 1,000, end quote. This plan places students in poorly ventilated dorms and refuses to test anyone who isn't a student, even if they are regularly on campus, such as classified staff, as Liz was mentioning earlier. Many different campus unions spoke out against these plans, protocols, and policies over the summer, but were largely ignored. Many public and private universities across the country have sufficiently robust test and trace programs, testing all of the campus community as much as 2 to 3 times per week, which is recommended by scientific models and research. And those programs are able to identify, isolate, and stop outbreaks successfully. At COVID Campus, we share the real stories of how UO is failing its community by not providing and requiring COVID testing for its workers, by making it unclear if they are guaranteed paid time off if they feel ill before they receive test results, by abandoning student workers to enforce COVID norms in public spaces without any support, by failing to confront the Greek houses that have been the source of documented COVID clusters with its patchwork approach to offering remote learning to high-risk students, and on and on. We hope to give the community a space to tell their stories and hold UO accountable while protecting the anonymity of those who come forward. UO opened with an inadequate plan despite knowing that their plan was inadequate. They are now individualizing the blame onto students for making easily predictable choices. We want to redirect the blame from visible acts of individual irresponsibility to the hidden institutional failures of the University of Oregon that are driving the spread of COVID-19 and putting the lives of our community members at risk. And then they end with a very simple statement, which is, do better, UO. So thank you so much to COVID Campus for sharing their thoughts on that. Please follow them on Instagram. They have been doing really amazing kind of sharing of the stories sort of from the ground and from campus itself, which is really cool. So now I am going to switch gears and read a statement from the student and community organization Disarm UO. Greetings. We are Disarm UO, students, alumni, faculty, and community members working towards racial justice through disarming and defunding the University of Oregon Police Department. We demand that the university disarm the UOPD, dismantle its legal status as a department of sworn police officers, and reallocate a substantial amount of its budget to rebuilding a more compassionate community health and safety system at UO. Since its formation in 2011, the UOPD has followed the pattern of all police departments by continually annexing the means of community interaction, like welfare checks, interpersonal violence resolution, parking enforcement, etc., in the process expanding its technology of surveillance and stuffing cash into its increasingly bloated budget. This is inherent to the structure of policing. By being a police department, the UOPD is the primary mechanism within the University of Oregon by which the state enacts its system of violent control. As should be all too clear by its relentless violence against Black, queer, Indigenous, houseless, disabled, chronically ill, and many other groups of people that have been marginalized, this system is not designed to protect the communities they are intended to serve, but to enforce a white supremacist social hierarchy under the guise of law and order. As we undertake this struggle to create a more just and equitable community, we must constantly remind ourselves to challenge our collective imaginations and be bold in our demands of those in power. Disarming unconditionally the UOPD is an essential and primary step towards dismantling the racist, violent system as it is reproduced and perpetuated at the University of Oregon. We must resist the narrative of fear that only police can keep us safe. This narrative is told with vivid stories of always imminent mass shootings and the hushed subtext that our houseless community members are always on the brink of violence. Instead, we can fundamentally reimagine our community of care. Beyond disarming and dismantling the UOPD, the University of Oregon must reallocate its resources to programs that promote safety and welfare of all students, faculty, and staff, especially those in BIPOC communities. There is no shortage of suggestions for how the archipelago of social control under the police can be broken apart and rebuilt, including crisis de-escalation programs, restorative justice programs for responding to sexual assault, expanding counseling resources, community housing and other reinvestment programs, and on and on. We don't claim to have the single final answer for how to replace the UOPD, but an insistence on the status quo is nothing short of a failure of imagination and a cowardly retreat to the past. Rather than its billionaire board of trustees, the university must meet the present moment, and in the midst of one of the largest social movements in the history of the United States, listen to the demands of its Black, Indigenous, people of color students, the many experts in its faculty, and the wisdom of its broader community to work collaboratively on a compassionate restructuring of the UO. The way the University of Oregon handles public safety is mirrored by its mishandling of the COVID-19 global pandemic. Instead of supporting students by lowering tuition or meaningfully engaging with them to assess student needs while they developed the reopening plan for academic year 2020-2021, the UO administration did what it does best, protect its pocketbooks. Now we have an exponential spike in cases, many from students living off campus, that the UO point blank refuses to take any meaningful accountability for. They loudly promise to create the right task force or committee and then let bureaucracy run its very effective and momentum-killing course. Does this ring any bells about how the university plans to deal with systemic racism on campus? If a bureaucratic task force cannot adequately address an escalating public health crisis, how could it begin the work of undoing its institutions of state violence? The parallels between policing and public health are reflected all the way through to the disparate harm done to BIPOC communities, and the UO so far has not demonstrated a concrete commitment to resolving either. The administration of the UO loves to perform the role of the benevolent authority by listening and nodding to our concerns, but failing to take real action, all the while allowing the interlocking machines of its bureaucracy to continue grinding away at the health and safety of its marginalized students. Our vision is not radical. The UOPD was established less than a decade ago without the university even attempting to demonstrate a real need for a police department and against an overwhelming 78% vote by the student body. Violent crime in the UO community was low then, is low now, and was not decreased by the formation of the University of Oregon Police Department. The major changes that the UOPD brought are its ballooning budget and its deepening of the expression of state violence on our campus. We call on the UO to make UOPD a temporary deviation from its often expressed mission for racial and social equity, rather than allow it to further entrench itself into the bones of the university. We invite our fellow students, colleagues, and community members to join us in working for the defunding, disarmament, and dismantling of the UOPD, and to take the first step of opening the space in which to create a university that actually protects and enriches the well-being of every single person and creature within its community. That was kind of a long one, but I thought it was pretty good. Can I just say that if anyone would like to engage in any of the stuff that folks had said from Disarm or from COVID.campus, you can feel free to follow either of them on Instagram. And Disarm UO does have an email, which I can direct folks to as we continue our conversation. Just wanted to flag that since I obviously can't speak on behalf of them if people have questions or stuff.
Thank you so much, Ree, for speaking on behalf of COVID.campus and Disarm UOPD. And thank you to all of our panelists. We will now move into a discussion section. So do any of the panelists want to respond to any of the statements made so far? And if you would like to do so, maybe we can use the raise hand function, and we'll go in order of the hands raised. Ree, yes.
Thanks for calling on me. This is starting to feel like class, which makes me feel comfortable. Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks to everyone for sharing those statements. I think that what strikes me the most is how it feels like the student community and the worker community on campus doesn't seem to have the sort of access and platform to really like get the things that we need to be able to have like a comfortable and safe space to do our work and to do our schooling. It's really interesting to me that, you know, these different groups that do different things all seem to have that common thread of, you know, not having enough of a say and not being able to really determine what our campus looks like and how it operates. I think that really resonated with what Nick said, but it seemed pretty clear in what everyone shared. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thanks so much, Ree. Liz?
I think this is pretty well covered territory at this point, but I just want to sort of take another opportunity to highlight the way that so many of the policies and projects on campus are entirely monetarily driven. We've seen time and time again the way that money gets kind of poured into sports or a new track or a new gigantic shiny building, and we're just told that there are buckets and money can't be moved out of those buckets, and therefore we can't do these more effective things that help a larger amount of the student body. And we're definitely seeing that in this particular case, in particular with testing. You know, the football team, they're being tested on a regular basis and they have really fast return on those tests. And yet the university is also turning around and saying, we don't have the ability, we don't have the infrastructure to actually do this for our students and our faculty and our staff. And so, you know, that's a clear like double standard. And it also very clearly, you know, you can follow the trail of money to see how that kind of leads into these inequities.
Thank you, Liz. Are there any other panelists who wish to share any thoughts about the statements shared? Yeah, Nick.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I would, yeah, thank you so much for the statements. That was really awesome. And yeah, I just agree with everything that's been said. And yeah, to me, like, I know I like, I talk about the Board of Trustees a lot, but to me, it really does boil down to when this, when the Board of Trustees was put into place around 2012, which was at the same time as when UOPD was also being put into place. And like at first they were tied together through a bill, and they eventually those bills were split up, but both bills did pass, which put in place the Board of Trustees and the UOPD. And yeah, I just think it just shows that all these campus stakeholders and student organizing groups coming together around this issue just shows that the power dynamics at the university are skewed and they're very far off. And yeah, they just we have this board full of these business people with their corporate mindsets, and like that absolutely like plays over into all the decisions that they make, and how they lean towards privatization, and how they don't hear any campus stakeholders when we're putting forth our concerns. And yeah, and just with COVID, I think this whole thing has like really highlighted that, like, unfortunately, in like a perfect way. And yeah, I just like reading through, I mean, you can just read through the COVID campus Instagram, and where it's really well documented, and see that. And it's just frustrating because you know, like the campus stakeholders, like the students, faculty, and staff, like back in March when COVID was first, like around March 12th, when we were first getting an understanding of that this was going to be like a really serious thing, and was going to have like economic impacts and just impacts all across the world in every single way. You know, like campus stakeholders knew how serious that was, and we were already taking it seriously then. But right from the start, the university, their priority was again on money and their own bottom line, and not the safety and like in the best interests of students, faculty, staff, and the community. And I think that for me, that was very clearly demonstrated when I was with a group of students at the Board of Trustees meeting that was on March 17th of 2019. And that was about 1 week into COVID. And at that point, there were already restrictions from the governor and like recommendations from the CDC to keep gatherings below 10. But the Board of Trustees decided to still meet. So a group of students had shown up to the Board of Trustees meeting, and they were in, and I was one of them, and we were we were in hazmat suits, and we had our masks and everything. And we were basically just asking for a delay of that meeting because it was not following the guidelines put out by the CDC and the governor. And then additionally, the decisions that they were making at the time was to increase tuition and then improve a $12 million jumbotron for Autzen Stadium. So it just seemed a little inappropriate for that meeting to be happening and for like decisions of such a large scale and big impact to be happening when we were still a little unclear of exactly what like the economic impact was going to be on the university. And the students had been, and myself had been standing in front of the doors, and Chuck Lillis, who is the chair of the Board of Trustees, was walking in, and it's Chuck Lillis. There's buildings named after him on campus. He's one of the most powerful people at the university. He was a big help in getting the Board of Trustees system even being put into place in the first place. So it was just really this like really interesting moment. But instead of choosing another door and like walking around us, he decided that the best thing to do would be to approach me with the intent to like make physical contact. And he had shoved me into a glass door. And then he went into the building, and someone happened to be recording, and he looks into the camera and he says, "I'm not afraid." And to me, throughout this whole thing, I just keep thinking back to that one moment. And I think it perfectly embodies how, like, what was going to be ahead and what we've all been through with COVID and their like very poor response, but then also just the years and years of these corporate interests having more of the say than actually the students, faculty, and staff and the community members. So just wanted to add that. I know that was a little long-winded, but yeah, thank you so much for what everyone's saying.
Thanks, Nick. Before we go to Liz, I just want to say for the reporters in the room, we're going to be taking questions from the press after this discussion. So we see your questions and we'll get to them. Thank you. Liz.
I just wanted to take a minute to highlight that the COVID.campus account also includes a lot of stories from undergraduates that are experiencing similar but different kind of challenges with campus life, and also some stories around Greek life that I think are really also indicative of the way that the campus is massively, or the administration is massively mismanaging this. So it is larger than some of the concerns that we are expressing here. And I just want to advocate for undergrads who are also really concerned and being put in some pretty dangerous situations.
Thanks, Liz. Ree?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one comment, and then we can answer the press's questions, I suppose, if we want. We did invite them here. I just wanted to thank Nick for sharing. That sounds like a really stressful experience. I heard that story when it happened and was pretty shocked at the extent, but I think it is a very specific and powerful example of student voices being literally silenced when they're just asking for what they need. And I think we really need to take that, I think, like very seriously, because, you know, the goal of a university should be to empower its students, right? And it's supposed to be a place of learning and growth and maturation. But when you can't control anything, it's really hard to do those things. So I just wanted to flag that and kind of say thank you for sharing, and think like we all need to think very seriously about those kinds of actions. Thanks.
Thank you, Ree. Do any of the panelists have anything more they'd like to add before we open it up to the press? Okay, so for the journalists in the room, I see that you're asking questions in the chat. We would like to, if you feel comfortable asking the question verbally, you can raise your hand, use the raise hand function, and I'll call on you to ask the question, or you can indicate in the chat if you would prefer I read the question out loud.
Thinking they may have stepped away for a moment.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, sorry, still haven't figured out how to raise my hand. You'd think after being at Zoom University it would have come, but not yet. I just have I guess for Liz and for everybody else, and I put it in the chat, with these health concerns and these workplace issues, if the university doesn't address that, kind of what will happen next? What steps will GTFF take?
We're going to continue to put pressure on them, and we are still attempting to have open discussions with them in good faith, and we are hoping to make some changes through impact bargaining, but the stakes are pretty low in that space, so there's not a lot we can do there, and we can't. This isn't really something that we can go on strike for, at least not at this any close to this this stage. So we just have to actually just keep pushing them to make these changes and make these problems more accessible to the public, so that they understand that they're not just speaking to the 1,400 some odd GTFF members, but they're actually we're really advocating for the entire community.
Thanks, Liz. Does any other panelists want to speak to that question? Yeah, Ree, and then we'll go to the next question from the press.
Yes, I can put on my hat of union officer and say that I think that we are committed to doing what it takes to get these changes that we need, because it's health and safety and people's lives being put at risk, just like that someone should not have to risk their lives to go to work and receive a paycheck, I feel. And many people do have to do that. And I think that we are committed to creating conditions where our employees and our union members are not being put at risk of like their bodily integrity at risk. So I just wanted to say that. But it looks like another great question in the chat.
Thanks, Ree. So our next question is, what would be one thing the UO could do to make you feel more supported in your roles as GEs? Liz.
I think that's a tricky question to answer, because all of these things that we've already brought up are really critical, and it very much depends on people's various different intersecting kind of issues. For myself as a single parent, for me, funding is very important, but for other people who might have immunocompromised family members, it's going to be very different. So I think we're not really willing to pick one particular space and say, oh, we're just going to fight for this. We have to actually fight for all of these. But I think another approach to your question might just be to say that there shouldn't be anybody having to be working in an unsafe condition whatsoever. Obviously that's subjective, but right now there's so many various different gaps that need to be closed. And that's just kind of the baseline in step one. Nobody should be working in an unsafe place where they feel unsafe.
Thanks, Liz. Do any of the other panelists, it sounds like Nick wants to speak to this.
Yeah, so I can't speak from the perspective of a GE because I'm an undergrad student, but just as someone that is part of the campus community and the Eugene Springfield community, something I would really like to, and this is just like I'm asking for crumbs here, but something I like to see is a little bit of accountability from the university. When there was that action earlier last week, President Schill had gone and talked to the students that were part of that action, and COVID was definitely something that they had talked about. And President Schill, quote, said, part of the increase in Lane County is from students. We went full remote, so they chose to come back. They're living off campus. And then he proceeded to say, nothing I did or said encouraged them to come here. But if you go through COVID campus, or if you talk to literally any students, you'll see that that is just so far from the truth. The UO had plenty of time to announce that that fall term was going to be remote when they knew that it was months before they announced that it was most likely going to have to be. And they led students on to the last possible moment. And we're one of the last West Coast universities to announce that it would be remote. But at that point, students were already in the Eugene Springfield community. They had already signed leases. They maybe had already lived here. They had to come back because some students, it's safer for them to be away from home. Some people come for work, et cetera, et cetera. So the university was absolutely responsible for the spike in Lane County. And I mean, you just look at the data of COVID cases and how it's been traced since the university started fall terms up, and how COVID cases have really been skyrocketing in Lane County. And yeah, I mean, my point is that the university absolutely had a part of that. And I would just like to see some accountability on that part, because right now they refuse to, and that's just really disheartening and inappropriate, honestly.
Thanks, Nick. Ree?
Yeah, jumping off of that, I was pretty shocked when I heard that as well, because this is so many folks' home. I mean, you go somewhere to a university for 4+ years, this becomes a home away from home, or assuming a particular background of someone that they have another place to go to is just a very weighted assumption that I think is very concerning. But to circle back a little bit, I think that the University of Oregon could provide, accessible testing to its employees, which is currently right now only being provided to students. And I'm not sure quite the level of accessibility. Another concrete thing that they could do would be give us all training on what to do if someone in your department gets COVID. We don't even have that right now. There's no mechanisms outlined of what to do if someone who is, say, in your lab, tested positive, what to do next. Everything gets put onto the Lane County public health officials, and it's just delaying. And with something like COVID, if you delay the response, then that's very dangerous, right? Because that person could be spreading it. They need to know as soon as possible if they're positive, and then they need to take the appropriate actions. So something like a training on what to do, and what to do for folks who taught in person. You know, I don't believe that they had any training on what to do, you know, how to interact with students in this way. And, you know, a lot of us who teach, like, we come here because we love teaching so much. Like, it's part of why we choose to come to graduate school here. And so I would just love a little bit of support in that way. And I think that would create conditions in which I feel like I can make a good decision. You know, I can make a good decision about how I teach my class because I'm being supported by my university.
Thanks, Ree. Liz?
Yeah, Ree, that actually reminded me of sort of just transparency in general being a really big issue. It's been very unclear for some time now exactly where these cases are coming from. So like there's not a lot of transparency in terms of contact tracing. You know, we're getting sort of, at least to my knowledge, we're getting a number, but we're not getting a sense of how these cases are being discovered in the community and where. So that's a pretty uncomfortable space. And then, you know, the dissemination of information is also really problematic because, you know, there's a lot of things that we are supposedly have as resources, but we've never been directed to them in a clear way. And that obviously doesn't help any of us to become educated about this situation on campus. And so, you know, that's a big issue. And I mean, certainly if information becomes a little bit more clearly communicated, that's not going to solve all of our problems, but it's actually a really simple start to addressing these issues.
Thanks, Liz. Do we have any more questions from the press? Again, you can use the raise hand function or post in the chat. Okay. Okay, it sounds like we have discussed all of the questions from the press, and we've had a really wonderful and lively and engaging conversation from our panelists. And I thank you all, press and panelists, for participating in this press conference. This will be posted live. This is currently being posted live on our GTFF Facebook page, and then will be posted more completely tomorrow. So thank you all for participating, and have a great evening.
Thanks y'all so much. Appreciate it.